They guard the throne of God with fire in their wings, with eyes that see every corner of creation, with a holiness that never sleeps. But why? Why did God choose cherubim, those strange, fearsome beings, to surround his throne? Was it to defend him from enemies? To awe the universe with glory? No. The answer is far more mysterious and far more personal. The cherubim do not guard God from others. They guard others from God. They stand as living boundaries between uncreated holiness and created life. They are not walls of defense, but veils of mercy. And what they protect is not just a throne, it is the fire of glory itself. They appeared when the world was still wet with the sorrow of exile. No grand announcement, no warning trumpet, only flame and silence. The first mention of cherubim in Scripture does not place them in the heavens, does not robe them in poetic praise, does not surround them with music and light. It places them at the edge of loss, at the gates of Eden. The garden that once pulsed with communion between God and man had become forbidden ground, and where once the voice of the Lord walked in the cool of the day, now stood beings forged of fire and glory, stationed not with smiles, but with swords. He drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden, he placed the cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. Genesis 3:24. These were no ordinary sentinels. They were not posted to retaliate. They did not exist to chase, nor to destroy. Their flaming sword was not vengeance. It was mercy wrapped in heat. For to return to Eden in a state of rebellion would not have meant restoration. It would have meant ruin. To eat from the tree of life while cloaked in sin would not have secured eternal joy. It would have sealed eternal separation. And so God placed guardians, not to defend himself from man, but to defend man from the consequences of divine nearness. This was not banishment by wrath, but exile by love. The cherubim were the first living picture of sacred boundary. Not a gate closed in bitterness, but a curtain drawn to preserve. They stood not as a threat to the curious, but as a shield between realms, declaring in silence that holiness cannot be touched with unclean hands. Their sword turned in every direction, not because they were hunting trespassers, but because the danger came from every angle, not from outside Eden, but from within the human heart. The ground was still fresh, with Adam's footprints, when the first boundary between man and God was marked not by walls, but by wings and fire. The cherubim were not guards in the human sense. They were not defending a perimeter. They were upholding a truth, that God's presence is not accessible through desire alone. It requires atonement. The presence that once delighted the soul now burned with untouchable purity. And in that flame, mercy took the form of restriction. It was the first revelation that sin is not just a choice, it is a state, and that state could not be brought into the presence of the Holy One without unraveling everything. The cherubim did not chase Adam and Eve. They did not strike them down. They did not call out from the garden or beckon with threats. They simply stood. And in that standing, heaven made a statement. There is a line between what is holy and what is fallen. And that line, for now, must not be crossed. What had been a place of life was now inaccessible. Not because God no longer desired communion, but because communion had to be redefined through redemption. The cherubim were the first promise of that future redemption. For to place guards at the gate implies there will one day be a return. And though the way was blocked, it was not erased. Though the sword burned, it also waited. Their very presence hinted that this was not the end. The tree of life was not destroyed. The garden was not dissolved. It was protected, preserved, awaiting the day when man would once again walk without shame, not by his own merit, but by the blood of another. The cherubim were not merely terrifying. They were prophetic. They were not a final chapter. They were a pause in the story. Their fire did not consume. It warned. Their wings did not flee. They hovered, suspended between judgment and grace. And in their eyes, those eyes full of divine awareness, was the knowledge that something greater was coming, that one day the sword would not be drawn but satisfied. One day the presence of God would not be a danger to man, but a dwelling place. But until that day, until the seed would come, until blood would speak louder than guilt, the way remained guarded. The cherubim held their post, not as jailers, but as living borders between the once was and the yet to be. In the great tapestry of redemptive history, their appearance at Eden's edge is the thread of boundary woven in holiness and flame. They are the first icons of God's mercy disguised as restriction, the first guardians of sacred distance, the first beings who stood where man could not go, not to keep him out, but to keep hope alive. The fire they bore did not scream of wrath. It whispered of preparation. For the throne they would one day surround in heaven was the same glory they veiled on earth. And the God they guarded was not hiding from man, but making a way for man to be restored without perishing in the process. The cherubim do not mark God's fear of attack. They mark God's commitment to sanctity. A sanctity so radiant it must be approached with reverence. A holiness so unrelenting it must be bridged by sacrifice. Their flaming sword is not a weapon of war. It is a warning of wonder. And their station is not a prison gate. It is a boundary of love, declaring with every shimmer of burning steel, "Here stands the presence, holy, holy, holy." Before Eden bloomed and before time bled into the soil of the earth, there was a place, not in the sense of geography, but of presence, a realm where glory was not a concept, but a reality that pulsated like living light. It was here, in the eternal courts of the Most High, that the cherubim were first seen, not by mortal eyes, but by prophets who were lifted beyond the veil of the visible. Ezekiel was one of them. By the river Chebar, the heavens opened, and what he saw could scarcely be contained in language. Living creatures, beings of immense power and mystery, emerged from the whirlwind of divine presence. Each had 4 faces: the face of a man, the face of a lion, the face of an ox, and the face of an eagle. Each face radiated an aspect of the infinite. Their feet sparkled like burnished bronze. Their wings stretched upward, 2 covering their bodies in awe, and 2 extended as if in readiness. Their bodies were full of eyes, not merely for sight, but for knowing, piercing perception that missed nothing, revealing a consciousness that was not of earth. They moved in perfect synchronization with the Spirit. Wherever the Spirit went, they went, not turning as they moved, for they existed in dimensions where turning was unnecessary. They did not speak their own will. They embodied the will of another. They were not mindless, but perfectly aligned, intelligent, fiery, and reverent. They were the living veil between the Creator and His creation. Their fire did not burn them. It radiated from them. It was the fire of holiness, not born from combustion, but from proximity to the uncreated light. When the Apostle John saw the throne in his revelation, he described 4 living creatures, again full of eyes, again with 6 wings, and they never ceased to cry out, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." They were not mechanical ornaments. They were not symbolic figures on a cosmic chessboard. They were alive, aware, awestruck, and what is most haunting is that they covered their eyes. Though they stood closer to God than any other created being, though they bore His throne and echoed His praises, even they, beings of flame and insight, could not look fully upon Him, not because of unworthiness, but because of overwhelming wonder. They existed within the circle of His radiance, yet they bowed in perpetual reverence. The fire that surrounded them was not destructive, but purifying. It did not consume them because they were fashioned for it, and yet they trembled, not from fear, but from awe. For the one they encircled is not like the stars or the sea or the angels themselves. He is holy in a way that cannot be shared or diluted, and so they cry holy, not because they are programmed, but because they are overwhelmed, again and again for eternity. They do not grow tired, they do not stop. The song is as infinite as the glory it describes. And here lies the mystery. The cherubim are not positioned as guards to keep danger out, but as a veil to keep creation safe. God does not need protection. The Creator of all is not vulnerable to attack. But creation is vulnerable to holiness. The closer anything comes to His glory unprepared, the more it unravels. Holiness is not passive. It is active. It transforms, or it consumes. And so the cherubim, in all their grandeur, serve not as bouncers before a throne, but as a living mercy between realms. They are the veil that trembles and sings and burns, declaring with every beat of their wings, "This is holy ground." And just as the veil in the temple separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the sanctuary, so too do the cherubim in heaven declare a line, not to keep God in, but to keep creation from collapsing under the weight of glory. They are not hostile, but they are unapproachable. Not because they threaten, but because their nearness to the divine makes them unbearably radiant. Ezekiel watched them move, and he did not say they walked. He said they flashed like lightning. John heard their voices and said it was like the sound of many waters, like thunder and flame and movement too vast to measure. And yet they are not chaotic. Every motion is order. Every cry is worship. They are the order of heaven in motion. The presence of the cherubim tells us something that humbles the mind. Even in heaven, proximity to God is not casual. It is not assumed. It is not simple. There is a structure, a reverence, a holy architecture that upholds the throne and surrounds it with praise and protection, not of God, but of those who would approach Him. The cherubim form the first circle of response. When the voice speaks, they move. When glory flows, they reflect it. When holiness blazes, they amplify it. They are not intermediaries like priests or prophets. They are embodiments of worship. Their song is not for themselves. It is for the one who sits above them. And yet, they are part of the very throne. Not merely near it, but integral to it. Ezekiel says the throne rests upon them. John sees them around it. They are its living foundation, its fiery halo, its pulsing testimony. And here, in the eternal now of God's throne room, we glimpse what was veiled at Eden. The cherubim did not begin with exile. They began with glory. They were not created as guards, but as carriers of divine presence. Their appearance at the garden gates was not their origin. It was their mission extended into the fallen world. From the beginning, their role was mercy. Their posture was awe. Their presence was a warning and a promise. They stand, fly, and cry, not to block the path to God, but to declare that such a path is not walked lightly, that no one, man or angel, stands before the throne by right, only by grace, only by holiness, only by fire. The cherubim are the veil that lives, that sings, that guards. They are the proof that heaven is not silent, that worship is not decoration, and that God, though uncontainable, has surrounded Himself with beings who reflect, uphold, and preserve the weight of His glory. And as they turn their many faces, ox and lion, eagle and man, they reveal to all creation the truth their wings hide, that God is not safe, but He is good, and those who would approach Him must do so through the fire, through the veil, through the holiness that the cherubim carry in every breath. The throne of God does not sit like a monument, frozen in celestial stillness, resting on pillars of stone or imagination. It is not like the thrones of kings, high and immobile, symbolic but inert. The throne of the Most High is alive. It breathes with fire. It radiates with holiness. It moves with purpose. And the ones who carry it, the cherubim, are not slaves of divine duty. They are the very pulse of its motion. In the visions of Ezekiel, the prophet does not see a throne surrounded by still worshipers, but a storm of glory. Lightning flashing, winds howling, wheels turning with eyes that never blink. It is not chaos. It is divine synchronization. And above the expanse over their heads, there was the likeness of a throne, in appearance like sapphire. And seated above the likeness of a throne was a likeness with a human appearance. Ezekiel 1:26. Beneath it, not pillars, not clouds, but cherubim, living beings whose wings touched, whose faces turned not from curiosity but from reverence, whose every movement responded to the breath of the Spirit. They did not decide where to go. They moved because glory moved. And when the glory moved, they did not walk, they surged. They carried the throne not like a burden, but like a crown upon the shoulders of light. The wheels beside them, wheels within wheels, moved in perfect harmony. And within those wheels was the same Spirit. Eyes covered every surface, not for intimidation, but for perception. For wherever God's throne would go, there could be no blind spots. There could be no corner of creation untouched by his gaze. The cherubim were not separate from the throne. They were part of its structure. They were the movement of holiness, not like servants bearing a king's chair, but like organs within a living being. They were woven into the throne's being, as limbs are woven into a body. When Ezekiel watched them rise, he did not say they flapped wildly or moved by instinct. He said, wherever the Spirit would go, they went, and the wheels rose along with them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Ezekiel 1:20. The throne was not static. It was not local. It did not dwell in one place because God does not dwell in space. He rides upon the wings of the cherubim, not as a passenger, but as a sovereign who has embedded his authority into the very fabric of creation. The throne is not a seat. It is a presence, and the cherubim are its fire-born structure. They go where judgment must fall. They rise where mercy must descend. They pause where revelation must speak. They move not with time, but with eternity's rhythm. Their wings stir the skies like thunder. Their gaze penetrates the veils of men and angels alike. Their voices do not shout, but creation hears them. And wherever they carry the throne, a new order begins. This is why Ezekiel saw the throne descending to earth, not to rest, but to act. The throne moves because God moves. It travels because his sovereignty is not confined. And the cherubim are the carriers of that movement. They are not beasts. They are not symbols. They are not remnants of ancient myth. They are the animated scaffolding of divine presence, shaped by holiness, bound by obedience, infused with spirit. Their four faces do not divide them. They complete them. They do not look in one direction because God is not approached from one angle. The lion roars with authority. The ox endures with strength. The man sees with wisdom. The eagle soars with vision. Together they form the complete gaze of heaven. And together they bear the weight of a throne that does not grow heavy because it is made of glory. There is no temple in heaven with beams and foundations. There is no need for supports, for the presence of God is not held up by stone. It is upheld by life, by beings who do not sleep, who do not stumble, who do not falter. The cherubim have no pride in their position. They do not boast that they are near the throne. They tremble, they burn. They know that proximity is not privilege. It is responsibility. They go because the Spirit goes. They lift because the will lifts. They rise because glory cannot be chained to one corner of creation. And even as they move, they worship. Even as they carry, they cry, "Holy, holy, holy." Not with fatigue, but with fullness. Their cry is not monotonous. It is ever new. Because the one they behold is ever new. And what Ezekiel saw is not a historical vision. It is a current reality. The throne still moves. The cherubim still bear it. The eyes still see. The wings still beat. And wherever they go, something changes. This is why the throne descended in fire at Sinai, why it hovered over the tabernacle in the wilderness, why it filled the temple with smoke and thunder, why it appeared to Isaiah and to John. The throne is not locked in heaven. It moves between realms. And wherever it moves, the cherubim go with it. Wheels of purpose, wings of flame, eyes of knowing. They are not moved by music or ritual. They are moved by the Spirit, and the Spirit moves where He wills. The cherubim are not celestial ornaments. They are the infrastructure of divine revelation. When God reveals Himself, they are present, not as mediators, but as the very frame upon which His presence rests. And their motion speaks. It says that God is not idle. He does not watch from a distance. He moves. He acts. He rides upon the wings of the wind. And though no man can approach his throne by force, his throne can approach man by grace. The cherubim make that possible. They are the fiery chariot of divine condescension, and they carry not just a throne, but the one who fills heaven and earth. To behold them is to behold the movement of eternity. To see them is to witness the weight of glory made visible. And to follow them is to follow the path of holiness. For they do not choose their route, they follow the Spirit. And where the Spirit goes, the throne goes, and where the throne goes, all of creation must bow. There is no creature in all of creation that carries within itself a fuller reflection of the character of God than the cherubim, not because they are the highest, or the most exalted, or the most beloved, though they are terrible in splendor and crowned with proximity, but because they were formed to mirror the glory of the one they bear. When Ezekiel lifted his eyes and saw the living creatures under the expanse, what struck him was not their flame, not their wings, not even the thunder of their motion. It was their faces, 4 faces, each unlike the other yet perfectly unified. The face of a lion, the face of an ox, the face of a man, the face of an eagle. This was no accident, no strange mutation of celestial anatomy. These were not artistic embellishments or esoteric riddles. They were revelation, a portrait in movement, a sermon sculpted in living flesh and fire. The lion, the king of beasts, roared with power, symbolizing divine authority, fearless and unchallenged. God is not fragile. He reigns with absolute dominion. He does not negotiate his sovereignty. He does not waver. He does not yield. The lion face burns with majesty, announcing to every realm that the one enthroned above them rules with thunder in his voice and justice in his right hand. And yet beside the lion is the ox, humble, enduring, silent under the yoke. The ox is not weak. It is strong through submission. It bears burdens. It plows fields. It lays down its strength in service. This face reveals a God who does not only command, but carries, who does not merely rule, but serves. The ox reminds creation that the God of fire is also the God who washes feet, who bears in himself the weight of our iniquity, who labors not from obligation, but from love. Then comes the face of a man, not the distorted face of fallen nature, but the perfect image, reason, understanding, communion. The God of the cherubim is not instinct or force. He is not cold will. He is mind and spirit. He understands. He thinks. He feels. He speaks. The face of man in the cherubim is not a projection of ourselves onto heaven. It is a reflection of the Imago Dei, reminding us that reason, morality, empathy, and language are not evolutionary byproducts, but echoes of the Creator's own mind. And lastly, the eagle, soaring, piercing, lifted above the clouds, with vision that sees what others miss. The eagle is the symbol of heavenly perspective. It sees from above, it descends with precision. It moves between heights and depths without strain. This face reveals a God who is not limited by time or angle. He sees the end from the beginning. He watches from eternity and yet acts in time. He is not surprised. He is not outmaneuvered. His sight pierces darkness, future soul, and heart. And all 4 faces are one being, one rhythm, one worship, one sermon. This is the mystery of the cherubim. They do not merely serve God, they manifest Him. They do not have one face because God is not one-dimensional. They do not turn their heads because glory is omnidirectional. Wherever you behold the cherubim, you see the whole nature of God reflected, not in words, but in presence, not in doctrine, but in design. And when they move, glory moves. When they sing, the heavens tremble. For their song is not composed. It is breathed. It is not rehearsed. It is born of nearness. They cry holy, not because they are told to, but because they cannot help it. They are not independent beings vying for attention or identity. They are unity in plurality, facets of fire revealing the fullness of the one who sits above them. Their presence at the boundary between heaven and earth is not a random assignment. It is strategic. It is symbolic. It is sacred. They stand at the threshold because they embody what lies beyond. They are the mirror between realms, the veil that reflects. And what they guard is not some hidden chamber or forbidden secret. It is a glory too potent to be approached with casual intent. Holiness is not hidden because it is selfish. It is veiled because it is overwhelming. The cherubim declare this with every wing beat, every cry, every turning wheel and burning eye. They speak without speaking, approach with reverence, for the one who dwells here is not like the idols of men. He is not fashioned by hands or confined by temples. He is fire and mercy, judgment and grace, lion and lamb. Their faces are the sermon the throne never stops preaching. They tell of a God who conquers like a lion, sacrifices like an ox, thinks like a man, and reigns like an eagle. They speak of mystery, but not confusion, of transcendence, but not distance. The cherubim are not the message, but they are the mirror. They remind us that God is never just one thing. He is always more. And in that more is the burning heart of worship. To know Him in part is to tremble. To see Him in fullness is to fall in awe. The cherubim do not allow casual glances. They demand reverence, not because they are proud, but because they are true. And when they spread their wings, they cast shadows of glory across the expanse. When they look in all directions. When they move with purpose. When they speak with fire. And when we see them, if we see them, we do not see strange beasts. We see a glimpse of the God who made all things, the one who holds power without pride, serves without weakness, thinks without limit, and sees without blindness. The cherubim are the living geometry of divine nature, the flaming choir of God's attributes, the eternal witnesses of what it means for holiness to take form. And they do not grow old, they do not dim, they do not fade, because the one they reflect is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And in every age, they cry the same word, not because they have no vocabulary, but because no other word is worthy: holy. The garden did not vanish when man fell. Its rivers still flowed, its fruit still bloomed, its air still shimmered with the afterglow of divine presence. Eden was not destroyed, it was sealed. The ground had been cursed, yes, and the labor of man would now draw sweat and sorrow, but the garden itself remained untouched, a living memory of what once was, and a prophecy of what would be again. And at its edge, where man had once walked freely in communion with his Maker, now stood the burning figures of the cherubim, silent, radiant, and unyielding. The passage is brief, but the implications are eternal. So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubim, and a flaming sword which turned every way, to guard the way to the tree of life. Genesis 3:24. This was not punishment, it was preservation. God did not raise a wall of wrath. He stationed a veil of fire. The cherubim were not sent to exact revenge on the fallen. They were sent to protect them from the terrible danger of unfiltered holiness. For to eat of the tree of life in a state of sin would not have brought salvation. It would have sealed damnation. Eternal life, once a gift, would have become a curse, an immortal rebellion, a soul fixed forever in separation. So God, in mercy too deep for flesh to understand, closed the way. But He did not close it with stone or silence. He placed His own messengers, those closest to His throne, those who reflect His nature, those whose very being declares the gravity of glory, at the gate. The flaming sword they bore turned in every direction, not as a threat to man, but as a warning to all creation. Holiness cannot be trespassed. The garden was not lost. It was guarded. The way was not erased. It was sealed. And the ones chosen to stand in that place, between paradise and exile, were not executioners, but cherubim. They bore the face of lion, ox, man, and eagle. They stood not as warriors with fury, but as living veils, beings of fire whose presence both repelled and beckoned. In them wrath and mercy held hands. Their silence screamed truth. This place is sacred. You may not enter, not yet, Not like this. They did not chase Adam and Eve as they wept their way into wilderness. They did not raise the sword to strike. They simply stood, bearing a glory that could no longer be touched by unredeemed hands. And in their standing, a great mystery was declared that God, though grieved, would not abandon his creation. The boundary was not the end. It was the beginning of redemption. For every barrier God places is a promise in disguise. A promise that he will make a way, that he will one day tear the veil, that he will not let the exile be final. The cherubim stood in that place, not because God had withdrawn, but because he was already preparing the path back. They were the first sentinels of sacred delay, messengers of grace that waits, of holiness that cannot be rushed. And though their fire terrified, it also testified. The tree of life still stands, the garden still breathes, the promise still lives. But it must be approached through blood, not pride, through humility, not ambition. Their sword was not a weapon of hate. It was a blazing boundary of mercy. It turned every direction, not to strike, but to signal that no angle of approach would succeed, except the one God would one day ordain. In this light, we see that the cherubim were not cosmic prison guards. They were prophets of coming restoration. Their station at Eden's edge was a sermon written in flame that God's holiness is not to be trifled with, but neither is it to be forever feared. It is to be approached, but only when the time is right and the sacrifice is ready. The cherubim guarded Eden like priests standing before a holy altar. The tree of life was no longer accessible, but it was not destroyed. It remained, waiting for the second Adam to come, not to eat of it, but to become it. And when he would come, he would not avoid the flaming sword. He would walk into it. He would bear its fire. He would take upon himself the full weight of divine justice, so that the way back to the garden could be opened, not with steps, but with blood. Until that day, the cherubim would keep their post, glowing with a brilliance that no man could behold and live. Their wings stretched in solemn vigil. Their eyes saw more than time. They beheld both past and future, fall and redemption, wrath and grace. They knew why they stood there. They remembered glory. They had seen man formed from dust. They had heard the joy of first breath. They had watched the horror of the first lie. And now they stood, not to gloat, not to condemn, but to preserve the sacred until it could once again be shared. Eden's burning boundary was not the final word. It was a pause, a sacred intermission in the song of communion. The cherubim marked the silence between notes, the glowing punctuation between paradise lost and paradise regained. And every generation that would follow, every nation, prophet, king, and priest, would echo that moment, whether they realized it or not. The temple veils, the sacrificial blood, the restricted Holy of Holies, all shadows of the cherubim's flaming post, all reminders that God is near, but not to be approached lightly, all whispers that the way is not gone, only guarded, until one day, at the fullness of time, the veil would tear, not in protest, but in invitation. The cherubim would no longer stand as barriers, but as witnesses, and the tree of life would no longer be protected. It would be offered. But for now, at Eden's gate, they stand, wings spread, eyes watching, fire turning, guardians of mercy, living boundaries of holiness, not executioners, not obstacles, but the first promise that God would rather guard man from himself than allow man to destroy himself. The cherubim were the first picture of a love that wounds only to heal, a grace that delays only to redeem, a holiness that burns, but only to prepare the way for eternal life. Long after Eden's gate had been sealed with fire and generations had wandered east of innocence, a new moment of divine closeness broke through the wilderness. The children of Israel, freshly delivered from slavery but still far from the promised land, camped at the foot of Sinai, where thunder echoed, the earth trembled, and God descended in a cloud of fire. It was there that God spoke to Moses, not just to give commandments, but to reveal a plan, a dwelling place. "Let them make me a sanctuary," he said, "that I may dwell among them." Exodus 25:8. But this was no tent of convenience or superstition. It was a mirror, a replica of something eternal, a shadow of heaven itself. And at the heart of this sacred architecture stood the Ark of the Covenant, crafted not by artistic whim, but by divine instruction. Every cubit measured, every detail ordained. And on the lid of that ark, the mercy seat, stood 2 golden cherubim, their wings arched forward, touching, not in flight, but in reverent overshadowing. Their faces turned inward, not to each other but toward the space between. The mercy seat, the very point where heaven and earth would meet. This was not ornamentation, this was revelation. These golden figures were not echoes of mythology, nor borrowed symbols from ancient cultures. They were replicas of what Moses had seen on the mountain, a glimpse of the invisible realm, where real cherubim stand, not carved from gold but forged in fire, encircling the throne of the Almighty. The tabernacle was not man's attempt to find God. It was God's blueprint for meeting man without destroying him. And central to that encounter were the cherubim, the same beings who once guarded Eden's entrance, now presided over its restored echo. But even here, even with all of Israel encamped around this holy tent, access was not open. The ark was hidden behind a veil. And beyond that veil was the Holy of Holies, a place so sacred that only one man, once a year, could enter it. The high priest would come trembling, not with authority, but with blood. The Day of Atonement was not a festival. It was a ritual of life and death. He would enter bearing sacrificial blood for himself and for the people, lest the holiness of God consume him. And there, before the cherubim, those silent golden sentinels, he would sprinkle the blood on the mercy seat. Between their wings, God promised, "I will meet with you." Exodus 25:22. The cherubim did not speak, they did not move, but their presence thundered a truth no Israelite could ignore. Approach is possible, but only through sacrifice. God had not erased the boundary of Eden. He had relocated it. Now, instead of a garden, the presence dwelled in a tent. Instead of a flaming sword, there was law and blood. Instead of man wandering in exile, there was a path, narrow, veiled, but real. The cherubim's wings, spread wide over the ark, were a bridge of memory and prophecy. Memory, because they reminded Israel of Eden, of the fall, of the first separation. And prophecy, because they hinted at a greater mercy to come. Their stillness was not silence, it was proclamation. They announced that God was near, but not yet fully accessible. That mercy was present, but still veiled. That holiness had made room for man, but not without cost. They did not guard Eden anymore, but they guarded the mercy seat. And in doing so, they declared the same truth as before. Divine presence is a gift, not a right. Holiness is not casual. The cherubim, golden and gleaming, were positioned above the ark, not around it, not beneath it, but above. Their gaze directed not toward worshipers, but toward the blood. This is crucial. They did not look to accuse, they looked to witness. Every year, as the high priest entered, they looked down. Not in judgment, but in solemn testimony that atonement had been made, that sin had been confessed, that life had been exchanged for life. And in that blood-soaked space between their wings, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob met his people, not to destroy, but to dwell. The tabernacle was mobile, temporary, always ready to move. Yet in its center was something eternal. The presence that filled the tent was not local. It was cosmic. And the cherubim, though shaped by human hands, reflected a heavenly truth that no matter how close God draws, the path to him must still pass through holiness. Israel camped around the tabernacle. 12 tribes formed a perimeter, but inside the tent, inside the veil, inside the ark, were the tablets of the law. God's covenant, God's holiness, God's demand for righteousness. And overshadowing it all, the cherubim, always watching, always pointing, always reminding that the law cannot be touched without blood, that the glory cannot be approached without reverence. They were not gatekeepers to keep man out. They were guardians of a grace too holy to be accessed without sacrifice. The message was clear. Approach is possible, but not on your terms, not with good intentions, only with blood, only with awe. And so year after year, generation after generation, the cherubim watched in golden stillness as high priests came and went, as incense rose, as prayers were whispered behind the veil. But even in all this ritual, the true way back to Eden had not yet opened. The veil still hung, the cherubim still guarded, the mercy seat still awaited a final sacrifice. The tabernacle, and later the temple, were earthly shadows of a heavenly pattern. And the cherubim within them were not religious art. They were echoes of an ancient reality. What stood in Eden stood now in gold. What once bore fire now bore silence. But the message remained. Holiness requires sacrifice. And so we are left with awe, with longing, with questions. If God had made a way to dwell among his people, why was it still so narrow? If cherubim once blocked the way, why did they now guard the mercy seat? And what blood could ever truly open the path? The answers lay ahead. But for now, in the wilderness, under the stars, surrounded by tribes and tents, two golden beings stood with wings outstretched, not to bar the way, but to bear witness that God had not abandoned his people. That the same fire which once closed the gate of paradise now hovered over a slab of gold, waiting for the moment when mercy would no longer be temporary, when sacrifice would no longer be annual, when the veil would no longer be necessary. And the cherubim, still in watching, waited too. All throughout the pages of Scripture, the cherubim stand, not as the enemy, but as the echo, not as the threat, but as the threshold. From Eden's gate to the tabernacle's veil, they burn with the same silent declaration, not yet. Not yet, because the wound of sin remains. Not yet, because holiness still consumes the unprepared. Not yet, because the fullness of mercy has not yet taken on flesh. And so they wait, fiery and patient, stationed not to destroy, but to guard what is too sacred to be approached casually. The cherubim are not the sword, they are the sentinels. They do not choose who may enter, they announce that no one yet can. But in that very restriction lies a hidden mercy, because to allow the unclean into the presence of the holy would not be compassion. It would be catastrophe. Their flaming vigilance is not vengeance, it is restraint. Their silence is not distance, it is the voice of a coming promise. Every golden wing carved atop the ark, every invisible sentinel in the heavens, every shadow behind the veil, every song that echoes holy without ceasing, all of it whispers the same prophecy. There will come a day when the fire will not consume, but welcome, when the sword will not turn, but be sheathed, when the veil will not conceal, but be torn. The cherubim know this. They have seen the throne. They have borne the weight of glory. They remember the moment the garden closed, not with fury, but with tears. They remember the silence between God and man, the long centuries of blood and smoke and prayer offered from behind curtains. And they know that the blood of bulls and goats could never cleanse the conscience. It was never enough. It was never the final word. And then, one day, on a hill outside Jerusalem, the fire moved again, but not in wrath, in surrender. The one who had spoken creation into being now hung upon a tree he had made. The Word who had walked in Eden now bore the curse of Eden. The true high priest passed not behind a veil made with hands, but into the heavens themselves, carrying not the blood of another, but his own. And as he breathed his final words, "It is finished," something unimaginable happened. The veil in the temple, the thick curtain that separated the Holy of Holies from the world, tore, not from bottom to top, as if by human effort, but from top to bottom by divine hand. In an instant, centuries of separation gave way to access. In a moment, the guarded presence of God became the welcoming presence of grace. The cherubim who once stood with flaming swords were not dismissed, but their role was transformed. They no longer stood to bar the way. They stood as witnesses to the way being opened. What they had once guarded in Eden, what they had veiled in the tabernacle, what they had overshadowed in golden silence, was now unveiled by blood, and not just any blood, the blood of the Lamb, who is also the Lion. Jesus did not bypass the cherubim. He fulfilled what they foreshadowed. He did not silence their warning. He satisfied it. He passed through the flame and was not consumed. He bore the sword not in resistance, but in willing submission. And when he did, the boundary became a bridge. The veil became a doorway. The guarded presence became an open invitation. No longer would one man enter once a year with trembling. Now all who come through the blood of Christ may enter boldly. Not arrogantly, not casually, but boldly, because the price has been paid, the wrath absorbed, the holiness upheld by the perfect sacrifice. And so the cherubim remain, but now they do not whisper, "Not yet." Now they declare, "Come." Not because God has changed, but because the way has been changed. Because holiness has not been diminished, it has been satisfied. Because the justice that once barred the way now bears the scars of love. Before we continue, if this content has blessed your life, like, comment, and share. Subscribe to the channel, and if you would like to bless the channel, click the Super Thanks button and leave an offering of any amount or become a member. That way, we can continue investing in research and improvements to bless your life even more. Now let us return to the mystery that has echoed since eternity. For though the veil has been torn, the glory still remains. The fire still burns. The throne is still holy. But now, through the torn flesh of the Son of God, man is invited in, not to be crushed, but to be changed. The cherubim still surround the throne, still cry holy, still bear the weight of glory. But now they also bear witness to a deeper mercy than they ever guarded. For the Lamb who was slain is now at the center. The one who was once hidden behind curtains is now enthroned in unveiled majesty. And all who come to him through the blood, through the cross, through repentance and faith, come not as trespassers, but as sons. The mercy seat is no longer a hidden chamber. It is a person. The veil is no longer a curtain. It is a body, torn and risen. And the cherubim no longer whisper from a distance. They sing in the open courts of heaven. Their song has not changed, but its meaning has deepened. Holy, holy, holy once meant, stay back. Now it means, behold the Lamb. The sword is not drawn, the fire is not quenched, the throne is not compromised, but the way is open. Not because holiness was lowered, but because it was lifted high on a cross. And the cherubim, who once flanked paradise with flame, now stand in awe of a mercy greater than the garden, a glory brighter than Eden, a love deeper than the veil. The boundary has become the invitation, and the presence once guarded is now our eternal home. Exiled and alone on the rocky island of Patmos, surrounded not by scrolls, but by silence, John the Apostle received a vision that would echo through eternity. What he saw was not fantasy or dream. It was a window, torn open between time and the eternal. And through that window he beheld what Ezekiel once saw, yet magnified, fulfilled, and crowned with glory. The throne still stood, not on a mountain or in a temple, but at the heart of heaven itself. It was encircled by lightning and voices, burning with brilliance like jasper and sardius, encircled by a rainbow that shimmered like emerald light. And around that throne, just as before, were the living creatures, the cherubim. They had not faded into history. They had not retired with the veil. They were not relics of a forgotten covenant. They were still there, burning, watching, crying out. But something had changed. Their cry was the same in form. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. But the center of their gaze had shifted. For now, at the middle of the throne stood the Lamb, as though slain, yet alive, victorious, radiant with the light of risen power. The cherubim had always sung of holiness, but now they sang of holiness revealed in flesh, crucified in shame, and crowned in glory. They no longer faced only upward in reverence. They faced outward, toward the saints, toward the redeemed, toward those who bore the mark of blood and the name of the Lamb. No longer guardians of a way yet to be opened, they had become witnesses of a salvation already accomplished. Their fire had not dimmed, their wings had not slowed, their eyes still pierced the unseen. But now, in their perpetual cry, was more than awe. There was joy. The Lamb had overcome. The scroll had been taken. The seals were being opened, and all of heaven shook with the weight of what this meant. The cherubim, once stationed at Eden, once silent above the ark, once burning at the veil, now stood in the open throne room, not blocking man from God, but proclaiming that man had been brought near through Christ. Their presence was no longer a warning, it was a witness. They still encircled the throne, but now that circle was open to the worship of multitudes, every tribe and tongue and nation, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. The fire that once turned every way to keep men out now blazed around a throne that invites all who believe to come boldly. And still they cry, still they burn, still they sing, not out of repetition, but out of fresh revelation. For the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ is inexhaustible. The four faces still remain: the lion, the ox, the man, the eagle. But now they reflect not only the nature of God, but the nature of the Redeemer, the lion who conquered not by war, but by sacrifice, the ox who bore the burden of sin upon his back, the man who wept, who bled, who rose, the eagle who ascended beyond death into eternal glory. In every face, the story of redemption is now etched more deeply, and the cherubim see not only the glory of the Creator, but the love of the Savior. What once was guarded by mystery is now proclaimed with fire. The sea of glass that lies before the throne is no longer a barrier. It is a floor for worshipers, a reflection of peace where once there was only separation. John saw elders fall, saints sing, angels shout, but above them all, still closest to the throne, still the first to respond, were the cherubim. They did not age, they did not dim, they did not evolve into something lesser or different. They simply beheld more fully and sang more loudly. Their song had grown, not changed. The holiness they once veiled in fire now flowed through mercy. The glory they once guarded now poured forth in grace. And their wings, always stretched in reverence, now beat in celebration. They do not forget Eden. They remember it with eyes that saw the gate close and now see it opened. They do not forget the ark. They remember it with wings that once cast a shadow over blood and now blaze with light before the risen Lamb. They do not forget the sword. They remember it not as an end, but as the beginning of a greater story. For they have watched the plan unfold from the throne room of eternity, and now they cry not only holy, but worthy. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing. Their voices echo through the heavens, and their faces turn toward God, yes, always, but also toward you, toward the ones for whom the blood was shed, toward the ones who were once blocked from Eden, once bound by law, once kept at a distance by a holiness they could not survive. Now through the Lamb they are welcomed, not as guests, but as sons, not as outsiders, but as heirs. And the cherubim see it all. The guardians have become the witnesses. The veil has become the invitation. The fire has become the welcome. And still they sing, not because they must, but because they see. Every moment brings a new facet of the glory of God revealed in the Lamb. Every cry of holy is deeper than the one before. Every beat of their wings stirs the air of heaven with the fragrance of fulfilled promises. The throne has not changed, but the song around it has grown. The cherubim still guard, not to keep out, but to proclaim what has been done. They stand as a living testimony that the God who once closed the gate has now opened his arms, that the fire that once warned now warms, that the holiness that once separated now sanctifies. The throne is in motion still, and wherever it goes, they go. Wherever the Lamb leads, they follow, and their cry, ancient, eternal, unshakable, now includes a name. Jesus, the center of the throne, the center of glory, the center of worship, the one the cherubim never cease to adore. When the final trumpet sounds and the heavens roll back like a scroll, When death dies and sorrow is swallowed in the light of resurrection, a new world will rise, not merely restored but reborn. A new heaven and a new earth, unmarred by curse or corruption, will unfold beneath the gaze of God, and descending from above like a bride, adorned for her groom, comes the New Jerusalem, radiant, pure, pulsating with the glory of the Lord. And in the heart of that eternal city, something ancient blooms once more, the tree of life, no longer guarded, no longer hidden, no longer a memory wrapped in flame. It stands, not in the midst of a lost garden, but at the center of the city of God, its leaves for the healing of the nations, its fruit unguarded and eternal. There is no sword here, no flashing barrier that turns every way. There are no cherubim stationed with burning wings to whisper, "Not yet." The fire has not gone out, it has gone in. For the ones who now walk these golden streets, who dwell in the unveiled presence of God, do not approach as strangers or trespassers. They come as sons and daughters, clothed in righteousness not their own, made holy by the one who bore the flame on their behalf. The separation that once defined the relationship between God and man has been utterly, irrevocably healed. What was once a chasm now sings with the sound of reunion. The veil is not torn, it is gone. The temple is not rebuilt, it is replaced. For now, as John declares, there is no temple in the city, for its temple is the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb. Revelation 21:22. The throne still stands, but no longer does it burn from behind curtains. It radiates in full view, and from it flows the river of life, clear as crystal, winding its way through streets of glory. And lining that river on either side is the tree of life, multiplied and magnified, no longer a guarded secret but a shared inheritance. The ones who walk here do so not because they were worthy, but because they were washed. The holy fire that once would have consumed them now dwells within them. They carry the flame, not in fear, but in fulfillment. They are living temples, redeemed reflections of the one who is both lion and lamb. And what of the cherubim, the watchers, the guardians, the fiery boundary between glory and corruption? Where are they now? Their post has been honored, their station fulfilled. Their wings, once stretched in solemn vigil, now rise in celebration. They are no longer stationed to protect paradise. They now join in its praise. They do not block the way. They line it. They do not guard the gate. They rejoice in the open doors. Their eyes, which once searched for transgression, now behold the face of the redeemed. Their fire, once a warning, now becomes part of the everlasting light that needs no sun or moon. They have not faded. They have been folded into the great worship. The guardians have become the choir. The path once veiled in mystery is now a highway of glory, where every step echoes the mercy that made it possible. No more need for atonement, for the Lamb stands forever as the final sacrifice. No more blood upon mercy seats, for the mercy now flows like a river. No more incense or intercession, for God himself dwells among his people, and his name is written on their foreheads. The distance is gone, the fire is now family, and the presence that once shattered mountains now walks with man again, just as in the beginning, but even greater. For this is not Eden returned. This is Eden glorified, and the cherubim who stood at the first gate now stand at the last, not to say you cannot enter, but to proclaim, the way is open forever. Their watch is complete, their station is fulfilled. The story that began with exile now ends with embrace. And the throne, the same throne that moved through Ezekiel's vision, that burned above the mercy seat, that tore the veil in the temple, is now the everlasting center of a kingdom that will never end. Those who once stood trembling outside the Holy of Holies now stand inside the city of God, not as visitors, but as citizens, not as sinners, but as saints. And the tree of life, once a memory behind flame, now bears fruit for all who thirst. The sword is gone because the wound it guarded has been healed. The veil is gone because the face it hid now shines upon every believer. The cherubim are still there, but they no longer separate. They surround. No longer do they say, "Keep out." Now they sing, "Come in." For the one who sat upon the throne has said, "Behold, I make all things new." And he has. So why do the cherubim guard the throne of God? Why, from the beginning of Scripture to its final vision, do these mysterious, flame-forged beings appear again and again, standing in the space between creation and creator, between what is holy and what is human? It is not because God fears rebellion, nor because he needs protection. The Almighty is not vulnerable. The throne is not a fortress to be defended. It is a furnace of glory that must be reverenced. The cherubim stand, burn, and cry, not to shield God from us, but to prepare us for him. Because glory is not casual, because holiness is not safe, because the presence of the infinite is not something mortals can touch without trembling, unless they are first transformed. The cherubim are not obstacles. They are invitations carved in flame. Their wings do not push us back. They draw a boundary of reverence. Their eyes do not scan for trespassers. They witness the unfolding of redemption. Their silence is not indifference. It is worship too deep for words. And in that silence, they announce to every generation, this is holy ground. From Eden's gate to Sinai's peak, from the Ark of the Covenant to the throne in Revelation, their message has never changed, only deepened. Access to God is not a right. It is a gift so precious it had to be guarded, a gift so costly it had to be bought with blood. And so the cherubim guarded, not because God was distant, but because he was drawing near, and that nearness had to be prepared. They remind us that God is not approachable on human terms. He is not summoned like a servant. He is not studied like a specimen. He is not entered like a room. He is beheld like fire, approached like thunder, known like glory. And yet, through Christ, we do not walk past the cherubim in fear. We walk through them in awe. For the veil they once stood behind has been torn. The sword they once guarded has been satisfied. The fire they once bore now burns within the redeemed. Jesus did not dismiss the cherubim. He fulfilled their message. He did not erase the need for holiness. He met it. He did not abolish the sacred boundary. He crossed it, bled on it, and made it a doorway. The cherubim once said, "Not yet." Now they say, "Come." Not because the glory has changed, but because we have been changed by the one who bore the weight of holiness for us, the one who passed through the fire without being consumed, the one who became the mercy seat, the veil, the sacrifice, and the priest. The Lamb who now stands at the center of the throne, surrounded by the very beings who once veiled that throne in fire, and now their wings echo with a new proclamation. Worthy is the Lamb. The mystery of the cherubim is not a tale of exclusion, it is a revelation of invitation. An invitation so holy, it had to be guarded until the time was right, and now the time has come. The throne is still burning, the glory is still overwhelming, the holiness is still absolute, but the way is open, and the guardians now stand not as sentinels of separation, but as pillars of worship. They remind us of what it costs to come in. Not silver or gold, not effort or sacrifice, but the blood of the Lamb without blemish. That is why they are there. That is what they proclaim. They are not in the way. They are part of the way. They are not blocking the door. They are holding it open in reverence. And as we enter the presence of God, clothed in the righteousness of Christ, filled with his Spirit, called sons and daughters of the Most High, the cherubim still cry out with wings of flame, not to warn us away, but to awaken our worship. They do not guard the throne because we are unwanted. They guard it because it is unspeakably sacred. And now by the blood of the Lamb we come, not with presumption, but with praise. Not with entitlement, but with trembling joy. For the path once guarded has become the highway of the redeemed. And the throne, once veiled in fire, now welcomes with glory. Holy, holy, holy. The song continues. And we, once exiles, now heirs, join in.